Here are the facts. In June of 1983, officers arrested Henry Lee Lucas. Along with his partner Otis Toole, Lucas eventually confessed to over 300 murders. The story took a bizarre turn when the killers claimed they were part of the Hand of Death, a nationwide cult of Satan worshippers. They said high-ranking government officials and businessmen were also members of the cult, and they also said they would not be executed. Are these the ramblings of psychopaths? Like most serial killers, Lucas and Toole were notorious exaggerators, but they weren't the only killers claiming membership in a cult. When David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, was captured, he said he was part of a cult called the 4-Pi movement, which ordered the murders. He only admitted to 2 shootings. Although some investigators believed his story, the media and courts ignored his statements. In 1979, an unknown assailant attacked Berkowitz in prison and slit his throat. After surviving the attack, he stopped talking about the cult. Could there really be a cult of serial killers? Let's look at 4-Pi. The story of the 4-Pi conspiracy begins with a group called the Process Church of the Final Judgment, founded in England. At the height of the 60s counterculture movement, the church found a home in San Francisco. Church representatives allegedly met with the Manson family before and after the Tate murders. When authorities dismantled the Manson family, the church lost credibility. They couldn't shed their terrible public image and dwindled, eventually reorganizing as an animal charity. Some believe the 4-Pi movement rose from the ashes as a violent offshoot of the Process Church. But 4-Pi is an obscure rumor, an urban legend. Berkowitz and Manson refused to talk about the Process Church or 4-Pi. If this cult really does exist, then who's in charge? Why did they stop killing? Here's where it gets crazy. Some believe the murders continue. After all, thousands of people disappear each year and no one knows how many serial killers remain free. Some killers swear they are part of a group. Berkowitz gave authorities information about 2 murders that occurred outside of New York even though he was not present. Lucas said he'd visited Jim Jones on behalf of the cult. During the 1980s, America fell victim to a hysteria over alleged satanic cults running the government. Ultimately, these claims were discredited. Yet many conspiracy theorists believe it's the other way around, that leaders of these shadowy cults are part of U.S. intelligence, meaning the government controls the cults. To support this claim, theorists draw connections between brainwashing projects like MKUltra and the use of criminal enterprise in Cuba and Central America. These agents allegedly use their influence to prevent any murders from coming to light until necessary, as a distraction from an unpopular war, for example. The main weakness in this conspiracy theory is that it relies heavily on the statements of people who are insane. Oddly enough, Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole were not executed. In Florida, Toole's sentence was commuted to life by Governor Jeb Bush. In Texas, Henry Lee Lucas received a commutation from then-Governor George W. Bush. This was the only reprieve granted under George Bush's term. To skeptics, it's a coincidence. To conspiracy theorists, it's evidence of something they don't want you to know.
The first question I ask in every case is whether or not there is any doubt about an individual's guilt or innocence. This is the first case since I have been the governor where the answer to that question is yes, there is doubt. The jury in this case had the opportunity to review much of the evidence which has been used to cast doubt on whether Henry Lee Lucas committed the crime for which he was sentenced to die. I am reluctant to second-guess a verdict of a jury in the courts. However, the clemency process is intended as a fail-safe for unusual or exceptional circumstances. In this case, at the time it made its decision, the jury did not know and could not have known that Henry Lee Lucas had a pattern of lying and confessing to crimes that evidence later proved he did not commit. His confession, now recanted, was the only evidence which linked him to the crime. Today's knowledge about his pattern of lies raises doubt. Henry Lee Lucas is unquestionably guilty of other despicable crimes for which he has been sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. However, I believe that there is enough doubt about this particular crime that the state of Texas should not impose its ultimate penalty by executing him. I concur with the recommendation of the Board of Pardons and Parole and hereby commute his sentence to life in prison, which shall begin after all of his 5 other life sentences are served. As a strong supporter of the death penalty For those who commit horrible crimes, I feel a special obligation to make sure that the state of Texas never executes a person for a crime that may not have been committed. I take this action so that all Texans can continue to trust in the integrity and fairness of our criminal justice system. Be glad to answer a few questions.
Governor Bush, obviously there's going to be some comparisons made with the Colorado backlash or otherwise.
I review every case on an individual basis. I've reviewed a case for an execution that's going to take place tonight, if the courts don't change otherwise. Every case must be reviewed on its own. In this case, there was doubt. If there's doubt, in my judgment, we should not execute a person.
Is the life sentence without parole?
Well, there's going to be 5 life sentences, and this will be imposed on top of that. Yes, I am.
Is this the first time that this has happened in the death sentence?
Yes, it's the only time I've commuted a death sentence, but it's the only time the Pardons and Parole Board have recommended commutation. This process, the governor is given 2 powers. First and foremost, if the Pardon and Parole Board recommends execution, I can either accept the execution and or delay for 30 days. If the Pardon and Parole Board recommends commutation, I can overrule and or accept the commutation request, which is what I've done. In their instructions to me, they recommended commutation and a lesser sentence, which I am now imposing. Yes, sir.
Governor, how long do you think Henry Lee Lewis will serve that?
Till he dies.
Do you believe he committed any of those 600 crimes he claims to have committed?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. But yet he has not been sentenced to death for any of the crimes, any of the other crimes.
Do you think there'll be an effort by some of the jurisdictions to try him for one of those murders and try to lose him to death?
Could very well be, Fred, and if that were to happen, that would be fine by me.
There's a victim's right group that calculated he was only served 5 years. You said
We've stacked the penalties.
you have the power to, because I understood they were served concurrently.
We have stacked the penalty in this case. We've waited till he's finished his other 5 life terms and imposed this on top of that, on those 5 life terms.
Governor, one thing that he did not commit a crime. I mean, he still understands.
Now, there's enough doubt that we not impose the maximum penalty.
Governor, so there is no chance at all that he will walk out free again?
Correct.
No, previous governors have ever committed a death sentence.
I can't.
The first one?
I'm not sure of that. Fred's been around long enough, he would know. Excuse me, Fred.
Metro Police had his blood, his saliva, and his hair, but the samples were shuffled between departments for so long that Paul Bernardo slipped through their fingers. That's the story we can tell you now that the jury in Bernardo's double murder trial is sequestered. Metro Police obtained those samples in November of 1990 in their hunt for the Scarborough rapist. But they weren't analyzed for DNA until 2 years later. If police had taken in Bernardo as a suspect then, possibly the deaths of Tammy Homolka, Kristen French, and Leslie Mahaffey could have been prevented. When police finally discovered the samples matched those taken from 3 rape victims in the 80s, they went to Bernardo's wife, Carla Homolka. She had left him because of a severe beating 2 weeks earlier. When Homolka realized her husband was a suspect in the French and Mahaffey murders, she began plea bargain negotiations. But according to Stephen Williams, who's writing a book about this case for Little Brown Bantam, police should have had Bernardo much, much earlier.
We have these stalking behaviors that positively ID'd him as the stalker. And on the other hand, we have concrete being analyzed by professors and all kinds of other gurus of concrete, but nobody says, well, gee, there's been a slew of bizarre sex crimes in Niagara region, and maybe stalking behavior is where we should start.
We love you, Kristen, and we're constantly in our thoughts and our prayers.
At about the same time Kristen's father was making this impassioned plea, a young woman named Lori Lazaruk recognized Bernardo's Nissan as the same car that had followed her a few weeks earlier. She trailed the car for blocks, but lost it just before it turned onto the street where Bernardo lived. She didn't know it, but it was Bernardo at the wheel, going home with a Swiss chalet dinner for Kristen French. The young woman reported all of this to police, but got the last digit of the license plate wrong. If police had gone to the Bernardo house at this point, they would have found Kristen French alive. From the late 80s, there were a number of tips pointing to Bernardo as a suspect in the Scarborough rapes, but for one reason or another, police failed to make the connection.
It frustrates me and perplexes me because you know how good they are with traffic tickets and how they can run your entire life history on their computers.
John Young lived behind Bernardo and Homolka in Port Dalhousie. He also knew Bernardo from the Masonic Lodge. Bernardo had joined the Masons. Young described the Masons as a fellowship of mature men. That brought a burst of laughter from courtroom spectators and members of the jury. Even Bernardo seemed to get the joke, smirking and shaking his head.